an apologetic. Some would take the book of Acts and see in it this apologetic against the Jews, that the Jews are always, wherever Paul goes, the Jews are raising Cain against him in persecution. They're stirring up crowds and mobs and riots against Paul, and it's largely done the Jewish people. And I think in a certain sense, there's an attempt in the book of Acts to discredit what the Jews were doing and showing that these guys were really just troublemakers, and therefore don't blame Paul for all this stuff. Paul was just doing his thing, and it had nothing to do, his point wasn't to make riots and mobs and this kind of stuff. But this was the Jewish response because of their jealousy of the Apostle Paul and his power and his teaching, the ways of Christ. So there's an apologetic purpose, the defense of the Apostle Paul, as we mentioned. Why were Christians persecuted in the early church? And I think this is important to realize. Why were Christians persecuted in the early church? A lot of times when a person's persecuted, a person is brought, charges can be brought against a person, and the person can be absolutely innocent of those charges. But just having made the charges and putting it in newspapers, the person is condemned already. The person is condemned already just by actually the allegations against the person. It's kind of like the people make a decision on the person without a trial, just with the allegation. And so here were some of the allegations made about the Christians. Does it matter whether they were correct or not? Well, in some sense it didn't matter, because what happened is Christians got killed on this basis and Christians got persecuted on this basis, even though these things were incorrect. One of the reasons why Christians were persecuted is they were considered to be atheists. Now, why would the Christians who worship Jesus and God, the Father, why would they be considered atheists? Well, because they didn't worship the gods of stone and silver that were made at Ephesus and other places. And so they were considered atheists. They worshipped a God who knows, you can't see this. They pray to the thin air. There's nobody out there. So therefore the Christians were atheists. And largely the people just did not understand that they believed in God, very strongly believed in God, but not in the gods of stone and silver. And so one of the early church fathers, and I forget who it was, but they were condemning him. He was being condemned to die as an atheist. And what he did was he turned to the crowd and he said, yes, okay, the atheists, away with the atheists. And he pointed to them as that they were the ones that were the atheists, not him. And so he said, away with the atheists, and pointing to them and reversing that and things, because the early Christians, sometimes they were, and I should mention too, that two things. One is that the early church persecution in the first century, Dr. Dave Mathewson brings this up in his lectures so well, and basically what he notes is that this Roman persecution from the Roman Caesars and things really didn't happen much in the first century. In the first century, much of the persecution was by local potentates and things in their little towns trying to please Caesar and show their loyalty to Caesar. And so what they would do is they would persecute Christians in other groups and stuff that had any kind of dissent going in order to show their loyalty to Caesar. But there weren't these empire-wide persecutions that there would be later on with Diocletian and some of these other later massive persecutions in the empire. So you need to kind of think about it. Christians weren't always being persecuted. A lot of it was at the local level by the local little dignitaries and things would make this rather than a universal scope of the Roman Empire. And that's, I think, important to understand with this. Okay. Now, why were the Christians persecuted? They were persecuted for being atheists. They were also persecuted for being incestuous. Now you say, what's the deal with this incestuous thing? Because they married their brothers and sisters. Okay? And so it was a closed kind of community where you married brothers and sisters. Now we know brothers and sisters. It wasn't incest. That's what we address people that are in the community as brothers and sisters, okay? We're not related to them physically and things, that that's the way they called. And this was another, let me just bring this up as far as as we just pointed out, that the Roman massive persecutions, it was more local stuff going down. And also in terms of the persecution of Christians, as long as Christianity was under Judaism, Judaism had a special dispensation in the Roman government. The Roman government basically let the Jews be the Jews. Now, sometimes they threw the Jews out of Rome, and you're going to see Priscilla and Aquila going down to Corinth and stuff. They got kicked out and things, Jewish persecution. But it wasn't, the Jews basically, the Romans just put up with them and basically just allowed them to be themselves. And they realized they weren't going to convert them and things. And so the Jews had a special place and were given a special role in the empire and weren't forced to do some of the other things that the other people were forced to do. Christianity then was viewed as a sect of Judaism. And therefore Christianity, when it hid under Judaism, and it was like viewed as a different sect, as you had Pharisees and Sadducees, so you had the people of the way, or you had the Nazarenes, as they were called, the people of the way of the Nazarenes. And they were considered, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, just to be another sect of Judaism. So it's kind of like, okay, those guys are just Jews, let them do their thing. They're just a sect of Judaism. But when Christianity pulled away from Judaism, and there was a bifurcation and a pulling away from Judaism, and Christianity stood by itself then some real persecution came because they weren't hidden under the umbrella of Judaism, and they became separate religion, and then there was more things for a lot of times too, the Christian group would have their meetings, and they were viewed by the Romans as these kind of secret meetings. And you never know, do they do these things in these secret meetings and things. And so they were alleged in these secret meetings that they were cannibals. And the Christians were almost, these people are cannibals. They drink their master's blood, and they eat his body. And this is my body, which is broken for you. And they eat his body, and they drink his blood. And so they said the early Christians were cannibals, and therefore these cannibals and atheists and stuff, we should wipe them out and stuff. Why? Because basically communion was misunderstood, and they took it as being, they're drinking his blood and eating his body and things, and so they were viewed as cannibals. So these are three reasons why the early church. Now we say those are totally bogus reasons, but you learn pretty soon in politics that it doesn't matter a lot of times whether something is true or false or not, because it's the allegation, and so you make this allegation over and over and over again. If you say the same lie over and over again, pretty soon people believe the lie. Okay? If you say it over and over again, you state it like it's fact, pretty soon people believe it. These guys are atheists, they're cannibals, they have these secret meetings, they marry their brothers and sisters, these guys are incestuous, and therefore we should rid the earth of them. That kind of a thing. So, Christians were persecutions, and so the book of Acts is then written in a way to show, no, these things are wrong, and that type of thing.